Elizabeth Sullivan was born and raised in Virginia, where her life seemed typical until she met Matthew Sullivan, a U.S. Navy petty officer. Their relationship developed quickly, described by many as a whirlwind romance that led to marriage in 2010. Soon after, the couple relocated to San Diego, settling in Navy housing at Liberty Station, where Matthew was stationed. At first, life together carried the promise of excitement, stability, and a shared future. Friends recall how the pair appeared happy and eager to start a family, embracing the opportunities of their new environment. By 2012, however, fractures in the marriage began to appear. The couple reportedly stopped sharing a bedroom, instead sleeping on separate floors of their 3-story Navy housing. Elizabeth was frequently left alone due to Matthew's deployments, forcing her to handle the responsibilities of raising their 2 young daughters largely by herself. This isolation began to weigh heavily on her, and according to accounts, she started communicating with other men. The distance between Elizabeth and Matthew widened, and the once promising union grew increasingly strained. By 2014, tensions within the household had escalated further. On at least one occasion, Matthew physically abused Elizabeth, a development that marked a serious turning point. Seeking stability and safety, she began consulting lawyers to explore options for separation. Her friends grew increasingly worried about her well-being, particularly as her personal struggles deepened. Elizabeth had a history of self-harm, and her habit of sometimes spending nights away from home, on occasion sleeping in a nearby park, added to the concerns surrounding her mental and emotional state. These factors combined to create an environment of instability within the Sullivan marriage. The contrast between the hopeful early days and the troubled years that followed set the stage for understanding the tensions and motives that would later define the case. On October 13th, 2014, Elizabeth Sullivan disappeared under circumstances that quickly raised alarm among her friends and family. That day, she was last seen near her home in San Diego, dressed in black trousers and a gray top. Before her phone was switched off, she sent a final text message to a family member. Her car remained parked at her residence, and she made no further contact. For a mother of 2 young daughters, this sudden silence was deeply troubling. Friends who were already aware of her fragile emotional state immediately feared for her safety and notified the police. At first, Matthew Sullivan suggested there was little reason to panic. He explained that because of their strained marriage, he believed Elizabeth simply needed space. He also mentioned that it was not unusual for her to spend nights away from home. However, even he acknowledged that being gone for more than one night was unusual. As time passed, Elizabeth's father, Edward Ricks, traveled from Virginia to help in the search. His emotional public appeals underscored the family's fear that she was in serious trouble. Despite these efforts, there were no significant breakthroughs. The case received widespread media attention, with Elizabeth's disappearance featured on missing persons programs. Yet, no concrete progress was made. An off-duty police officer reported seeing her at a soccer field near her home about a week later, but this sighting produced no additional evidence. Meanwhile, Matthew told investigators that Elizabeth had emptied their shared bank account before leaving. Friends and family rejected this explanation, insisting she would never willingly abandon her children. By the middle of 2015, months after she vanished, the investigation reached a standstill. There were no confirmed sightings, no new leads, and no clear answers regarding what had happened to Elizabeth Sullivan. Nearly 2 years later, on October 6, 2016, Elizabeth's disappearance took a grim and heartbreaking turn. Just days before the 2nd anniversary of her vanishing, a member of the public reported the sight of a body floating in San Diego Bay, less than half a mile from Elizabeth's home. The body was badly decomposed, but investigators quickly confirmed the remains belonged to Elizabeth Sullivan. The medical examiner later determined that Elizabeth had been stabbed multiple times, with wounds so severe that bones in her face and ribs were fractured. What troubled detectives further was the unusual condition of the remains. Despite being missing for nearly 2 years, her body showed far less decomposition than expected, raising questions about whether something had preserved the remains or delayed the natural process of decay. Elizabeth's friends and loved ones were devastated by the discovery. Calandra Duckett, one of her closest friends, admitted she screamed and cried for days after hearing the news. Nathan Character, another friend, described the painful duality of the moment. He explained that while the discovery gave an answer, it destroyed the fragile hope he had held on to, saying he would prefer to live with hope than face such a crushing reality. Detectives also noted the suspicious timing of the discovery. On the same day Elizabeth's body surfaced, her husband Matthew Sullivan was preparing to leave San Diego. He was separating from the military, starting a new life on the East Coast, and moving in with a new girlfriend. For police, who had quietly considered Matthew a person of interest since Elizabeth vanished, the discovery provided a chilling reason to intensify their focus on him. After Elizabeth's body was recovered, investigators intensified their efforts and conducted a thorough search of the Sullivan residence. What they uncovered turned the case from a disappearance into a homicide investigation. Detectives discovered traces of Elizabeth's blood soaked deep into the carpet and even into the wooden floorboards of her bedroom. Evidence that suggested a violent struggle had taken place inside the home. During the search, police also found a knife hidden under layers of insulation in the attic. Forensic testing confirmed the presence of Elizabeth's blood on the weapon, making it a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Investigators then connected another suspicious detail. Records show that the day after Elizabeth vanished, Matthew Sullivan purchased a carpet cleaner. Detectives believe this was an attempt to remove visible bloodstains and conceal what had occurred in the bedroom. As forensic evidence mounted, investigators began piecing together a disturbing theory. They concluded that Matthew killed Elizabeth inside the family home, then stored her body in a freezer located in the garage. This, they suspected, explained the unusual condition of her remains when they were discovered nearly 2 years later. Detectives further theorized that when Matthew prepared to leave San Diego in October 2016, he was forced to dispose of the body. He allegedly dumped her remains in San Diego Bay, hoping the current would carry them out to sea and erase any trace of the crime. On January 31st, 2018, nearly 3.5 years after Elizabeth's disappearance, Matthew Sullivan was arrested in Delaware. He was extradited to San Diego and formally charged with first-degree murder. With physical evidence, forensic testing, and a clear investigative timeline, authorities believe they finally had the proof to hold Matthew accountable for Elizabeth's death. Matthew Sullivan's trial commenced in February 2020, nearly 6 years after Elizabeth's disappearance. Prosecutors presented a narrative of a marriage that had deteriorated into conflict and violence. They argued that Elizabeth intended to leave Matthew and possibly take their children with her, a decision he feared would undermine his control. Evidence was introduced showing Elizabeth had withdrawn $1,000 from a couple's joint bank account shortly before she vanished. Prosecutors contended this was preparation for separation and a clear motive for Matthew to act violently. The prosecution also emphasized the forensic findings. They pointed to Elizabeth's blood found soaked into the bedroom carpet and floorboards, the knife hidden in the attic containing her blood, and Matthew's purchase of a carpet cleaner the day after her disappearance. They asserted that Elizabeth had been stabbed at least 5 times, her body stored in a freezer in the garage, and eventually dumped in San Diego Bay when Matthew prepared to move across the country with his new partner. The defense countered with a markedly different portrayal. They argued Elizabeth was deeply troubled, highlighting her history of self-harm and claims of drug use. They suggested the blood found in the bedroom could have come from self-inflicted injuries and questioned whether Elizabeth herself might have hidden the knife. They described Matthew not as an aggressor, but as a husband attempting to cope with a partner struggling with instability and destructive habits. After weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations. Their decision came after a day and a half of discussion. While Matthew was acquitted of first-degree murder, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. This verdict reflected their belief that he was responsible for Elizabeth's death, but not in the premeditated manner the prosecution had alleged. In March 2021, Matthew Sullivan was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Elizabeth. The sentencing hearing brought emotional testimony from Elizabeth's family and friends, who shared the profound impact her death had left on their lives. Her father, Edward Ricks, and others described years of pain, uncertainty, and grief, emphasizing that Elizabeth had been a devoted mother and a cherished daughter. They made clear that her absence would remain an open wound, impossible to heal. The prosecution underscored the cruelty of Matthew's actions, noting his lack of remorse throughout the investigation and trial. They criticized him for allowing friends, family, and the public to believe that Elizabeth had abandoned her children, when in fact she had been murdered and hidden away. According to prosecutors, this deception only deepened the suffering of her loved ones and prolonged their agony. Matthew addressed the court briefly, offering no expression of guilt or sorrow. Instead, he claimed that missing defense witnesses might have altered the jury's verdict, suggesting their testimony could have shifted the outcome of the trial. His statement was met with disbelief and frustration from Elizabeth's supporters, who viewed it as another attempt to deflect responsibility. The judge delivered a stern rebuke before announcing the sentence, describing the crime as a brutal and deliberate act carried out against a vulnerable spouse. He emphasized that Matthew had not only taken Elizabeth's life, but also left 2 young children without their mother. With the sentence imposed, the courtroom acknowledged a measure of justice, though Elizabeth's friends and family made clear that no prison term could truly compensate for their loss. While Elizabeth's case reached a grim conclusion, another haunting mystery was just beginning in New Rochelle, New York. 24-year-old Valerie Reyes suddenly vanished. On the morning of January 29, 2019, 24-year-old Valerie Reyes of New Rochelle, New York, vanished. Valerie had been employed at a Barnes & Noble bookstore in Eastchester for nearly 3 years, and her co-workers quickly noticed her absence when she failed to appear for scheduled shifts. Her sudden disappearance raised alarm because Valerie was known to be reliable and punctual, and it was entirely out of character for her not to communicate with her family or workplace. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Valerie had expressed deep anxiety and growing paranoia. She had moved into a basement apartment in New Rochelle, but had begun to feel unsafe there. On the phone with her mother, Norma Sanchez, Valerie voiced her fears plainly. She told her she was terrified and confessed that she believed someone was going to murder her. Although she did not identify any particular person or give a reason for her fear, the conversation left her mother unsettled. This call, in retrospect, would take on haunting significance once Valerie could no longer be reached. When Valerie stopped answering calls and messages, her family became frantic. They reached out to friends, co-workers, and the wider community, hoping for any sign of her. Flyers were quickly printed and distributed across the city, and photos of Valerie circulated widely on social media platforms. Her relatives pleaded with the public to help find her. The New York Police Department issued an alert describing Valerie as last seen wearing a green coat, black jeans, and black shoes. They noted that she suffered from anxiety and depression, adding urgency to the search. Valerie Reyes' disappearance marked the beginning of a nightmare for her loved ones, setting in motion an investigation that would uncover devastating truths. On February 5, 2019, a week after Valerie Reyes was reported missing, a grim discovery was made along a roadside in Greenwich, Connecticut. A group of highway workers conducting a routine sweep noticed a red suitcase lie about 15 to 20 feet from the road. At first, it appeared ordinary, but when opened, it revealed a horrifying sight. Inside was the lifeless body of Valerie Reyes. Her hands and feet had been bound with white string and packing tape, and her shirt was unbuttoned, painting a chilling picture of the circumstances of her death. Law enforcement was immediately called to the scene, and investigators quickly secured the area. Greenwich, a town known for its wealth and tranquility, was shaken as crime scene tape and police activity filled the wooded roadside. Authorities worked carefully, collecting evidence and documenting the disturbing details. The Connecticut Chief Medical Examiner's Office assisted in identifying Valerie, though the cause and manner of death were not immediately released. The confirmation of her identity shattered the hope her family had been clinging to since she went missing. News outlets reported the discovery widely, and the case drew significant public attention. Amid the shock, controversy also arose when one of the workers present at the scene was placed on leave for taking photos of the body and crime scene, behavior condemned as thoughtless and insensitive. For Valerie's family, the discovery was devastating. They held vigils, lighting candles, praying, and mourning together while demanding justice. This moment transformed the case from a desperate search for a missing woman into an active homicide investigation that would soon reveal disturbing truths. Following the discovery of Valerie Reyes' body, investigators began piecing together the evidence that would ultimately identify her killer. One of the first breakthroughs came from her phone records. Detectives learned that her device had been switched into airplane mode around 3 o'clock in the morning on January 29th, the day she disappeared. This unusual activity raised immediate suspicion and suggested an attempt to conceal her movements or silence her phone. Attention then turned to Valerie's financial history. Records revealed several suspicious withdrawals from her bank account shortly after she vanished. Surveillance cameras capture a man wearing a black hooded sweatshirt making these transactions. Investigators traced the individual's movements to a rental car, and records from the company identified one of the authorized drivers as Javier da Silva. Inside Valerie's apartment, investigators made another key discovery, a drawing that matched the profile image from one of da Silva's social media accounts. This physical connection strengthened suspicions already forming around him. At the same time, detectives interviewed Valerie's friends to better understand her personal life. One of them, Naomi, provided valuable context about Valerie's recent dating history, which included several individuals, among them da Silva. Law enforcement agencies coordinated across jurisdictions, reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, examined social media footprints, and followed every lead. Slowly, the pieces began to align, pointing toward a single suspect. The combination of digital forensics, financial tracking, and personal testimony created a compelling case. All evidence increasingly circled back to Javier da Silva, a man with a brief but significant history with Valerie, marking him as the prime target of the investigation. On February 11, 2019, the investigation reached a pivotal moment when law enforcement officers arrested Javier da Silva in Queens, New York. His capture came after investigators confirmed he had been using Valerie Reyes' ATM card in the days following her disappearance. Surveillance footage and bank records showed him making withdrawals totaling around $1,000 from her account, a discovery that tied him directly to the crime and eliminated any lingering doubt about his involvement. At the time of his arrest, da Silva attempted to provide an explanation to investigators. He initially claimed that Valerie had fallen and hit her head during an encounter at her apartment, suggesting that her death was the result of an accident. However, this account quickly unraveled as mounting evidence contradicted his story. His use of Valerie's bank card, the disposal of her body in a suitcase, and the bindings found on her hands and feet demonstrated deliberate actions rather than a moment of panic. Authorities formally charged da Silva with kidnapping resulting in death, a serious federal offense carrying significant penalties. His immigration status also drew attention. He was identified as a Venezuelan national, though reports later connected him to Portugal as well. He had entered the United States in 2017 on a visa, but failed to leave within the required time frame, placing him in the country illegally. The arrest was a result of extensive collaborative work. Greenwich Police, the FBI, and multiple law enforcement agencies coordinated across jurisdictions, piecing together surveillance, digital records, and witness interviews to close in on their suspect. For Valerie's family, the arrest brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. The man responsible for her death was finally identified and placed in custody, but the confirmation of his role deepened the pain of knowing the truth. This turning point marked the transition from suspicion to undeniable accountability. Following Javier da Silva's arrest, the case moved into the courtroom, where shocking details emerged about his role in Valerie Reyes' death. Court documents revealed that da Silva admitted to taping Valerie's mouth, binding her hands and legs, and placing her inside a suitcase. He then transported the suitcase to a wooded area in Greenwich, Connecticut, where he abandoned it, leaving Valerie to die in terrifying isolation. Da Silva also confessed to stealing from her after her death. He raided her bank account, withdrawing nearly $1,000, and took her iPad, which he later traded for other electronics. These actions underscored a disturbing mix of cruelty and self-interest, portraying him as both callous and calculating. Initially, da Silva lied about the circumstances of Valerie's death, telling investigators that it was a result of an accidental fall. However, as the evidence mounted, he changed his account and ultimately admitted guilt as part of a plea agreement. He pled guilty to causing death during a kidnapping, a federal charge carrying severe penalties. During court proceedings, da Silva appeared subdued and often emotional. Reports described him sobbing at times, an image that contrasted starkly with the brutal nature of his crimes. His defense team sought to humanize him, presenting letters and photographs that depicted him as having positive qualities. Yet prosecutors counter by stressing the calculated cruelty of his actions and the devastating impact they had on Valerie's loved ones. These courtroom admissions sealed De Silva's legal fate, providing undeniable proof of his responsibility and ensuring justice for Valerie. In March 2021, the legal process reached its conclusion when Javier De Silva stood before a federal judge for sentencing. Judge Vincent Brachetti handed down a 30-year prison term, describing De Silva as evil and labeling his crimes sickening. The court firmly rejected attempts to portray him as a man of good character, emphasizing instead the cold and calculated nature of his actions. Valerie's mother, Norma Sanchez, delivered a heart-wrenching victim impact statement. She described her daughter as a source of joy and light, someone who touched the lives of everyone around her. Facing De Silva directly, she called him a worthless soul and declared that he deserved nothing but pain and rejection. Other relatives and friends echoed her anguish, sharing how Valerie's violent death had left a permanent void in their lives. De Silva, speaking in Spanish, expressed remorse during the proceedings. He admitted that he would never forgive himself and acknowledged that he could not ask Valerie's family for forgiveness. Yet his words did little to ease the sorrow of those left behind. With no parole in the federal system, De Silva will remain behind bars until he is in his 50s, ensuring he spent the prime of his life in prison. For Valerie's family, the sentencing brought a measure of justice, but it could never erase the trauma of her loss. The court's decision closed the case legally, but the emotional scars will endure for those who loved her most. Valerie's case had shaken community, but soon another chilling story would emerge. Just weeks later, the disappearance of Ashley Lachey Elkins in Michigan would uncover an even darker trail of evidence. On January 2nd, 2025, 30-year-old Ashley Lachey Elkins was last seen arriving at the Roseville, Michigan apartment complex of her ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. Surveillance cameras recorded her pulling up in her silver Chevrolet Malibu at approximately 7:58 a.m. The footage showed her stepping out of the vehicle and walking toward the building. This was a final confirmed sighting of Ashley before she disappeared without a trace. Investigators later confirmed through cell phone data that her phone was active at Booker's apartment that same morning, supporting the images retrieved from the complex's surveillance system. Ashley was a mother of 2 young children, balancing the responsibilities of parenthood while managing her daily life. On the morning of her disappearance, she was reportedly running errands, a routine activity that gave no indication of what would follow. The sudden silence from Ashley quickly drew the attention of her family, who were accustomed to hearing from her regularly. She had been in contact with her mother, Monica, the previous day, but by January 2nd, she stopped responding to calls and messages. This abrupt lack of communication was highly unusual and immediately concerning. As the hours passed, worry turned into alarm. Monica recognized that her daughter's behavior was completely out of character. By that evening, the unease grew stronger, and by the next day, it was clear that something was very wrong. Monica began reaching out, trying to trace her daughter's steps, which eventually pointed her toward Booker's apartment. These early suspicions marked the beginning of what would become a far-reaching investigation into Ashley's disappearance. Ashley Elkins was last seen on January 2nd, 2025, but the concern from her family had already begun the day before. Her mother, Monica, testified in court that she last heard from Ashley on January 1st, when Ashley sent her a short but meaningful text message that simply read, "Amen." After that moment, Ashley became silent. Calls and messages from her family went unanswered, which was immediately unusual. Monica knew her daughter's habits and recognized that this silence was not normal, especially given Ashley's close relationship with her family. By the afternoon of January 2nd, the unease had grown. Monica began taking steps to locate her daughter, eventually going to the Roseville apartment of Ashley's ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. Her decision was based on information showing that Ashley's phone location had been at that address around the time she was last heard from. Despite these efforts, there was still no sign of Ashley, and the situation quickly escalated into a missing persons case. At the same time, Ashley's family launched their own efforts to draw attention to her disappearance. They pressed police to investigate more thoroughly, refusing to let the matter fade into uncertainty. Their determination played a central role in ensuring that Ashley's case was taken seriously. Authorities soon turned their focus toward Booker. His past relationship with Ashley, combined with suspicious behavior, placed him under scrutiny. The family's persistence, paired with these emerging suspicions, laid the foundation for investigators to closely examine Booker's actions before and after Ashley vanished. As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Ashley Elkins, they uncovered disturbing digital evidence tied to DeAndre Booker's phone. The trail began on December 22, 2024, when the device was used to search a phrase, "Telling God I want to kill someone." This alarming query stood out as an early indicator of violent thoughts in the days leading up to Ashley's disappearance. A week later, on December 29th, the phone was again used for troubling searches, including 9mm silencer Roseville and Murder Out of Rage X. These terms suggested not only anger directed at an ex-partner, but also possible attempts to obtain or understand firearm modifications. The pattern of searches grew even more critical on January 2nd, 2025, the same day Ashley vanished. On that day, the phone was used to look up "shoot gun through pillow sick" and "can you track location when phone is off?" Both phrases hinted at preparation, concealment, and a desire to avoid detection. Just 3 days later, on January 5th, another query appeared. What happened to trash after it's picked up? Prosecutors emphasized that this search aligned with their theory that Ashley's body may have been discarded in a dumpster and later transported to a landfill. Additional searches showed efforts to cover tracks, including deleting history, beating lie detector tests, escaping while on the run, and checking distances from Michigan to Ohio. Together, these searches created a chilling timeline. Prosecutors argued they revealed not random curiosity, but a mindset focused on violence planning and concealment both before and after Ashley's disappearance. During court proceedings, prosecutors introduced crucial surveillance footage that became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case. The video, taken from the Roseville apartment complex, showed a man pushing a shopping cart toward a dumpster. Inside the cart was an object concealed beneath a white sheet. The footage revealed the man stopping at the dumpster and appearing to struggle while attempting to lift the covered object. Investigators testified that the movements were consistent with the difficulty of lifting and discarding a limp human body. Detective Chris Moran told the court that, in his view, part of the footage even appeared to show what looked like an arm protruding from the cart. Although the video could not definitively confirm the identity of the man, prosecutors maintained that the clothing seen in the footage was key. When authorities later searched Booker's residence, they recovered clothing that closely resembled the attire worn by the man in the recording. Among the items was a dark coat with a fur hood, which reportedly displayed a faded area that looked like dried blood. Further examination of the dumpsters at the complex led to the discovery of blood traces, supporting the prosecution's belief that Ashley's body had been placed inside and removed through trash collection. From January 13th to 19th, authorities conducted a detailed search of the Pine Tree Acres landfill, where the complex's trash was taken. Despite the intensive search, no remains were recovered. The absence of a body presented a major hurdle, but prosecutors argued that the video, blood evidence, and digital searches together strongly supported their case against Booker. Testimonies from key witnesses played a crucial role in presenting the prosecution's case during the preliminary hearing. Detective Patrick Taylor took the stand to describe the chain of evidence linking Ashley Elkins to DeAndre Booker's apartment. He confirmed that cell phone data placed Ashley at the complex on the morning she vanished. Taylor also outlined how surveillance footage, showing a man with a cart near the dumpsters, connected with the later discovery of blood traces. His testimony emphasized how multiple pieces of evidence pointed back toward Booker's residence and actions on January 2nd. Detective Chris Moran provided further analysis of the video. He testified that the footage displayed a man clearly struggling while lifting an object covered by a sheet into the dumpster. Moran explained that the visible effort was consistent with the difficulty of moving a human body. He also suggested that part of the video appeared to show an arm extending from the cart, though identity could not be confirmed. The court also heard from Ashley's mother, Monica. She described her daughter's abrupt silence beginning January 1st as deeply uncharacteristic, reinforcing her immediate concerns. A third witness, whose identity was withheld for safety, revealed that during a phone call with Booker, he asked whether police were searching through the trash outside his apartment, a question that heightened suspicions about disposal of evidence. Investigators also recovered a bullet fragment, a clump of hair, and a hoop earring from the plumbing at Booker's apartment. Together, these testimonies and findings created a disturbing narrative of Ashley's final moments and what may have occurred afterward. Throughout the preliminary hearing in August 2025, DeAndre Booker's conduct drew nearly as much attention as the testimony itself. From the very beginning, his behavior was marked by defiance. On August 6th, as the hearing opened, he ignored the judge's instructions to sit, instead standing with his arms crossed and glaring at witnesses. Several reporters described him smirking as evidence was presented, his demeanor unsettling both the court and the family members in attendance. His disruptive attitude continued over the course of proceedings. On one occasion, he refused to wear his assigned jail uniform, opting instead to appear virtually on Zoom in civilian clothing. This refusal prompted repeated warnings from court staff, yet Booker remained uncooperative. District Court Judge Joseph Bedecker eventually referred to him as a very disruptive defendant, a rare and direct rebuke that underscored how difficult it was to maintain order. The most alarming incident came when Booker's microphone, left unmuted during a virtual session, captured him screaming profanities at the court. He shouted, "Let me F-king go," startling those present and forcing the judge to pause the proceedings. Observers noted that his outbursts reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of him as volatile, unrestrained, and unwilling to respect authority. Booker's refusal to follow courtroom protocol, paired with his hostile body language and profane interruptions, created a lasting impression. His behavior not only reflected poorly on him in front of the court, but also supported the prosecution's case that he was uncooperative and prone to aggression, strengthening the narrative against him. DeAndre Booker now faces a series of severe charges as the case moves closer to trial. Prosecutors have filed counts of first-degree premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, disinterment and mutilation of a dead body, concealing a death, and lying to police. Despite the fact that Ashley's remains have never been located, authorities stressed that the weight of digital evidence, forensic findings, and surveillance footage was more than enough to move forward. Booker has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense has argued that the absence of a body creates a significant gap in the prosecution's case. But investigators and prosecutors counter that the digital trail and physical evidence point unmistakably to foul play. They continue to emphasize that even without Ashley's body, the pattern of behavior and the disturbing details uncovered during the investigation tell a complete story. For Ashley's family, the legal battle has been both exhausting and heartbreaking. Her mother and loved ones continue to grieve, facing the daily pain of not knowing where her remains may be. The loss is compounded by the absence of closure, as questions about Ashley's final moments remain unanswered. Her 2 children have been left without their mother, a tragedy that weighs heavily on every step of the proceedings. As the case advances toward trial, the evidence presented during the preliminary hearings will serve as the foundation of the prosecution's arguments. With jury selection still ahead, the courtroom is expected to revisit every disturbing detail of the case in pursuit of justice.